So if this is in the key of C, the collection of notes around the key of C, I could rotate it forward down here to the Dorian. So now I'm going to say it's in D, but now it's in D Dorian. So I've rotated, the chords have all been shifted up. Notice when I do this, the Dorian is a minor mode, the Ionian is a major mode. So it's not quite as simple as shifting up to all 12 collections of 7 notes, as we would if it was going from Ionian, C Ionian to D Ionian. This time we're going to the related modal point, to Dorian. But if I have a chord, notice I can just rename the chord. So this was an Ionian chord, now it's a 3-note Dorian chord. This was a 4-note Dorian, now it's a Phrygian. And all the chords will snap into place, meaning the Dorian now has a minor third as opposed to a major third, and all of the relative positions from a Nashville number system can then be rotated up to the relative positions. The only time you have a problem is if there's going to be one that was in the ocean, a note that's outside of the collection of 7 notes, and then it got transferred to a non-existent note. We'll talk about that more later. But the general idea is that you can shift it to the Phrygian, right? And then you could shift it up and rotate it to the Lydian. This is something that a DAW system should be able to do automatically, and it's something that we can do fairly easily if we were to write our music from the perspective of a Nashville number system. Because if I write it from the perspective of the Nashville number system, if it's in the Ionian, I could just shift everything forward and it'll into the Dorian, right? The Ionian, 1 shift forward would go to the Dorian. An Ionian chord, 2 shifts forward would make it a Phrygian chord. And then these numbers, I can do the same thing. It's only the ones that are in the ocean. If I shifted this one up 2.5 to 3.5, there is no 3.5 from a relative perspective. So it would have to snap up to 4 in that case. All right. So that's the general idea. So we want to be able to write our information as efficiently as possible. And I truly believe that the DAW systems will at some point have this capacity, because it just makes sense that it would increase the ability for tinkering with music, particularly for those people that don't know music theory, as well as those that do, that want to make really complex things like jazz and whatnot, and want to tinker with it in a musical way. So I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. Again, we have a whole thing on this in Excel in another course or section if you want to break this out and try to build this in like a DAW or database. So notice we started, I just gave a background information for the MIDI system just so you get an idea of how like the background information for like a DAW is basically broken out, meaning they use a numbering system that's not one that we would want to use to memorize music typically, because they started way at zero, which is an octave, a way low octave, so they can basically count up from that point. So they have a numbering system that we can use as an absolute numbering system, but it gets down to 60 being a C, right? From our perspective, to memorize numbers, I don't want to make the C, that would be C4, in the middle of a piano, the place that we play in most. I wouldn't want to make that number 60. I would want to make that number 1 or possibly number 0, right? But I just want to point out the numbering system in your database program is going to use this numbering system typically because that's what's behind everything, right? But from our perspective, from a piano, you'd see that as C4. Now note that the C4 system also is something that I don't particularly, it's not the best system. Why did they choose 4 to be the C that we normally play in? You would think that they would have chose it from A because that's the collection of notes. You would think that at least A would be A4, A to A. But of course the piano then is tuned to C, so we get this weird kind of thing happening there. And why did they choose 4? Because they didn't want to go into negative numbers. That way you can go into the low direction but not get negative. Why not have negatives? I don't know. They don't like negative numbers. What I would rather call it, right? If we were starting over, I would rather call this center point the middle of the piano. I would name it from A to G sharp. The alphabet would be 0. That would be the 0 octave. and then you would go 2 octaves up to the right and 2 octaves back to the left. That would be nice, symmetrical, beautiful symmetry there. But we have to deal with what we're dealing with. Now notice again, as we put this into our tablature, we might want to start, like if I'm playing in this middle area, then if I'm starting whatever collection of notes I'm starting on, if it was on, the C that I was starting on, then we would be going from the C up from there. But if I was starting on a D, then I would like the D to be my lowest note. So again, if you're trying to make a nice, easy tablature that you're working in, if you're starting on D as the lowest note, it would be nice to have one row represented with D as the lowest notes, 12 notes up from there. Therefore, you can put 1 octave in 1 row by just defining what your starting point is, which is going to be somewhere in the middle section, either from C to C or from A to A, which would be your normal middle point where you typically play the middle of the piano. All right. So from our numbering system, I would like to number it 1 through 12, meaning our notes would have a numbering system of just 1 through 12. So A through G, I have A sharp and B flat represented by lowercase ab. So A, lowercase ab is A sharp or B flat, B, C, C sharp or D flat, D, D sharp or E flat, E, F, F sharp or G flat, G, and then G sharp or A flat back to A. So from a local distance, not taking into account octaves, I would number those 1 through 12. That numbering system is useful for our purposes, even as human beings, whereas to call the C60 is not as useful. And I would also like to make A to A, basically the middle part of the piano, but starting at A, what I would call octave 0. Right, that would be octave 0, and then we go octave 1 would be going up to the right in pitch, and negative 1 would be going to the left in pitch. I think that would be the more efficient system if you can do it over or start from scratch. But we have to know whatever convention that we're working in to work in that convention. Then the numbering system that takes into account octaves, I would think would go up this way, right? 1 through 12. And then 13, 14, 15, 16, up to 36. So that means this would be the system if I was at 13 minus 12 is 1, the local distance. 14 minus 12 is 2, the local distance. So this would be the numbering system for an absolute numbering system that would be useful for human beings to memorize, whereas this numbering system is the one that's behind most of the DAW systems and MIDI systems. Okay, so then what about the chords? So then we can get our collection of notes, right? So our collection of notes, when we're playing in anything in Western musics, we're usually looking at it from the perspective of a 7-note collection. Now you might say, hey, look, what if I only want a 3-note collection because it's a chord? Or what if I want a 5-note collection because I'm playing in a pentatonic? Well, that's fine. But we typically think of the 5-note collection as a subset of the 7-note collection. So you can systematically look at this. We're basically looking at the system as 12 collections of 7 notes. That's useful to have because then I can look at the system from the perspective of the relative positions of all those 7 notes. That's what gives me the rotatable dial that should allow me to automatically turn the dial, allowing me to automatically transpose the system. At least that should be easy to do through all 12 collections of notes. So in other words, if I apply the whole half formula, if I start on C, and we can start anywhere, but if I start on C, it would be a whole step to D, and then a whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A, whole step to B, and then a half step back to C. So that from a local numbering system would be 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, 1, 3, or C, D, E, F, G, all the letters that are not sharp and flat. Here's the formula: whole, half, whole, half. Now that formula, if of course I start in any other location, like right here, that would be the formula for the Dorian. which would be whole, half, whole, half, whole, right? And then this would be the formula here. So it's all one formula. It's just that where you start at will differ, that will determine the mode that you're in. So this collection of notes then has 7 modes to it if you start on any of those collections of notes. Nashville number system gives a permanent number to those, which is basically taking the scale degrees for the major scale and making them permanent, not changing the one, just keeping them the same. That is a key idea. That's important. That's more efficient to do, meaning if I have the scale degrees 1 through 7 for the major, I'm just going to keep those the same, and I could abbreviate it with the nodes, meaning Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian. This is Lydian, which I have with a Y, Mixolydian with an X, Aeolian, Locrian with an N. And then, so then if I play something in Dorian, I'm not going to change it to the 1. It's just going to be still 2 node, Nashville number 2, which is the Dorian node. That allows us, again, to have a dial that we can put